This week's topic on Mastering the Mastermind is local button pages. And we did a whole episode on button pages a while back. And just a quick refresher, button pages are a real key concept in the masterminds, and it allows you to set up different sets of buttons for different purposes. This is most readily demonstrated on the Mastermind PVCs. On a PVC, when you power it up, the buttons will activate presets and select banks. And if you press the page button here, or its labeled function on the device itself, it'll switch to the next page. And now all of a sudden your buttons are turning loops on and off manually. Pressing it again will get to the function switches and the inputs and the outputs and all that. And so, same buttons on the physical device, but they're doing completely different things on each button page. And on all the masterminds, there are 16 button pages. And so for most people, most applications, that's plenty. And so, you can just, live with your 16 button pages and everything is fine. Sometimes, though, if you have a really complicated rig or complicated devices, you may need even more than that. And you may need special buttons for just a particular preset or something like that. And so that's where local button pages come in. And so where you would normally edit a button page on the Buttons tab, local button pages are done on the Presets tab. And so the idea is you would select, one of these presets and, and you can reassign things. So let's say, for example, on preset 2, we need direct access to a loop. We want to have like a particular pedal we want to turn on for a few bars or something like that. And we don't want to have to flip over to the separate page that just has the loop buttons. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set up a local button page that only on preset 2 will replace the preset 4 button with a button that controls a loop instead. So all you have to do in this case is click Edit Local Buttons, and now we have a blank local button page. And this is really important to notice, because sometimes guys will check Edit Local Buttons or Local Page, and and then they'll say, and then they'll go off to another preset and start editing things. Although what happens here is that, you have a blank button page now, and you may find yourself, calling that up, and you're like, why don't my buttons do anything? It's because you just loaded up a blank page. So if you do go in here and you have a blank page, what you should do, this setting here, specifically local page, controls whether this preset has a local button page or not. You turn it off, and then you can go back to page 1 and see your normal buttons again. And basically it's like it never happened. But if you turn on local page here or click Edit Local Buttons, that will turn that checkbox back on, and now you're staring at a blank page. Okay, so if you remember, our purpose was to have something kind of like the original button page, but we want to replace one button on it. So with Edit Local Buttons checked, and this is important because you can't actually change these buttons here in this view unless this button is checked. And so what we're going to do is we're going to right click in this area and pull up the menu, and we're going to copy from page 1. And yes, we do want to copy it. And so now we've copied the original preset and bank page, but now it's just local to page 2, local to preset 2. And so now we can go in here and change things. So we can double click here, or actually we don't even need to double click. We could, but we can also just say assign CC, internal, and then loop 3. And do you want to convert this to instant access? Yes. And so now what was formerly a preset 4 button is now a loop 3 button. Okay, and so that's fine, and you can see that we still have the other pages here. This selector just shows which page you're currently working on, and so you can see pages 1 and 2 and 3, etc. And even though the menu kind of goes off the screen in this video, there is one at the bottom that says local page, and that will show us our local page complete with loop 3 button. An important setting here is preset specified, and what that does is it will switch pages automatically. So when we switch to preset 1, we get the original button page, page 1, and if we switch to preset 2, now we get the local page for page 3. So basically, this preset specified setting basically does what it will do on your actual mastermind when you select pages. Which page shows up when you select a preset is controlled by this show page selection here. So you say preset 1 is going to show page 1 automatically. Preset 2 is going to show the local page. Most of these start on page 1. Sometimes you would want to change that, especially in this case. And as soon as you start turning on local page and edit local buttons, this automatically gets set to local page, because we're kind of assuming that that's what your intention was. One last thing to check on that, in the global setting, there is an auto page select setting, and this controls whether the actual mastermind actually does that changing of pages when you change presets. And so we'll want this on. So what's going to happen, we load this up in our mastermind, we select preset 1, our buttons do this, we go over and select preset 2, and our buttons change to have the loop 3 button. And so that's kind of a complete setup for local button pages. And that'll take care of stuff for you, and you can do anything you want. You can replace any of these buttons. I just chose that one because it on a limited button device like a PBC6, you only have a few buttons to work with. But if you're on preset 2, you don't necessarily need the preset 4 button, especially if you're never going to switch directly from preset 2 to preset 4. But you can instead, change any of these other buttons, the bank buttons or the external switches if you have them, and remap those, whatever makes sense to you, and you can replace one or more of these buttons in each one of your presets. And that's the nice thing about local button pages. We've got 768 presets, so you could potentially have 768 local button pages if you were really crazy and needed all of those. One other thing I should mention is that when you do have a local button page for a preset, the local button page will take the place of global page number 16. So there's 16 pages, but if your preset has a local page, it sits in place of number 16, so you don't have access to 16 anymore. And on the Mastermind GT, it works very similarly. Here we have it set up for an AxeFX 3. The AxeFX 3 has a ton of effect blocks that can be changed, like I think well over 100, and so you definitely don't have enough buttons to control everything on there, even on a GT22. And this is the default setup with amps and drives and delays and some of the more common effect blocks. And you can use your built-in button pages, and I've set one up here already that has the looper controls, for example, and and so that's really useful. You could switch over and use the looper, and you'll only have access to a few effect blocks, but at least you still have some. And then when you don't need the looper anymore, and you instead want to go back to having your normal effects, you can just go back to page 1, and there you go. But there are so many effects, as I said, or if you have another kind of setup, like maybe an Apple main stage or bias effects, or one of those computer-based setups with effects where you may have completely different plugins for every preset, then you probably want to start looking at local button pages so that you can have buttons that represent what you want to do. I don't have this set up for main stage or anything right now, but we can continue with the AxeFX example, and let's go to our presets. And let's say just simply that we want to have on preset 4, we want to have access to some completely different effects. And so we'll go to preset 4, and then we do our edit local buttons, and that automatically turns on local page for us. And like we did before, we right click and we copy from page number 1, and we get our buttons back from the first page, making our copy. And then you can right click and assign different effects. We could, put in a graphic EQ. We can put in a, let's say, compressor. So any, different combination of effects you can have for this particular preset. And so you can do this, completely different preset or completely different buttons for every different preset if you like. Probably about the last thing I need to talk about is how page buttons work in this kind of setup. We'll look here at this sort of standard page store button. And what happens with a local page, if you recall, a normal page button like this or a page up and page down, what they do normally is they will just move up to the next page, and it's limited by this max button page parameter here. So we only have 2 button pages defined. What's actually going to happen on the device, though, is that the local page, if it's available, is always included in that. So if we are on our GT and we're on, if we were on preset 1, for example, you'd press page once and you'd go from page 1 to page 2, and you'd press page again, and then you would go back to page 1 because we're limited to just 2 button pages in that setting. If we go over to preset 4, if you remember, preset 4 is the one that we overrode here with a local page. And so this button would now, when you press it, would go from preset 1 to 2, and then it would go from 2 to the local page, and then you press it again, and then it goes back to preset, or page 1, excuse me. And so, the local page is always included because if you have one, it's likely that you're going to want it. And so one thing here also is we have each page button has limit numbers. We can set a minimum and maximum. If they're set to the same, it ignores these, and it just basically does what I just said. It, goes by the maximum button page and includes local button page in there if needed. Now, if we were to set these to 1 and 2, this really would exclude the local button page. It would say, okay, this page button switches between pages 1 and 2 and doesn't go any further. And so just, if it's not doing what you want, just make sure that these settings are correct and that this page button is going to access the pages that you want. So most of the time you don't need to limit things here. You just set them both to 1, and then these just get ignored, and the page button will do what you, will access any of the pages that you actually told it to globally. Okay, and that is all for local button pages. Any questions? Always feel free to post some questions below or contact us through our help desk. As always, like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more episodes in the near future. Thanks.